There are nights when the desert feels older than memory itself. Nights when the wind drags sand across the empty road like it is covering the tracks of something better left forgotten. Our town sits right in the middle of that nowhere. A dying place with more boarded windows than living souls, and a jailhouse that should have been condemned years ago. I was the one left to watch over it. Not because anyone believed it was necessary, but because someone had to stay behind and keep the lights on in a town the rest of the world had already erased. My station has one office, 2 holding cells, and walls so thin I can hear coyotes breathing outside on cold nights. The radio crackles once in a while just to remind me it still works. Other than that, I sit alone at a metal desk with peeling paint, listening to the wind push dust against the windows like a steady whisper. That was the kind of night it was when the man walked in. No car. No footsteps leading up to the front door. Just the sound of the hinges creaking as the door opened and he stepped inside. He looked as if he had been pulled straight from the earth. Dust coated his hair, his shirt, his boots. His eyes, though, were clear. Too clear. They held a strange kind of acceptance, the way a man looks when he already knows the outcome of a fight he cannot win. He leaned on the counter with both hands and said, with a voice so calm it felt wrong, "I will not survive the moon." I stared at him for a long moment before I answered. "Sir, are you hurt? Do you need medical help? What happened out there?" He shook his head slowly. "The moon. Tonight. I need a cell. Lock it. Do not open it." His voice cracked on the last words as though he had been repeating them for miles. I stepped around the counter and studied him more carefully. He was not drunk. He did not smell of alcohol at all. His pupils looked normal. His breathing was steady. If he was on drugs, it was nothing I recognized. "You are asking me to arrest you for no crime." He looked at me then, and the desperation in his eyes sent a small shiver through my chest. It was not the desperation of a guilty man. It was something worse. It was the desperation of someone begging to be saved from himself. "Please, cannot be free tonight. I cannot be out there when it rises." I crossed my arms. "You mean the full moon? That what you are talking about?" He closed his eyes and nodded once. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You must not laugh at this. The change comes with the moon. It always comes with the moon." I wanted to laugh. Not cruelly, but out of disbelief. People wander the desert sometimes, sun-baked and empty-eyed, talking about spirits or curses. Most of them just need rest, water, and someone to sit with them until daylight. But something about the man's tone rooted the laughter in my throat. There was sincerity in him. A deep, bone-level fear I did not understand. "What is your name?" I asked. He hesitated. It was the hesitation of someone who once had a name but no longer claimed it. I lost that long ago. That was the moment I felt something shift inside the station. The air grew heavier, as if the creaking walls leaned in to hear him. The humming lights buzzed lower. The desert wind pressed harder against the windows. I exhaled slowly. "All right. If you want a cell, you can stay for the night. But you will be checked by a doctor in the morning." "Understood." He shook his head firmly. "There will be nothing left for the doctor to see." The way he said it unsettled me more than anything else. I gestured toward the hallway. "Come on. Let us get you settled." He walked ahead of me without protest. His steps were steady but heavy, as if each movement cost him something. I unlocked the cleaner of the 2 cells and opened the metal door. He paused on the threshold and looked at me with an expression that was almost pity. "When the moon reaches its height, do not come back here. Do not try to open this door. No matter what you hear." I tried to keep my voice level. "What exactly do you think is going to happen?" His answer came soft, fragile, like a man crumbling in his final confession. "The desert remembers its oldest curses. And tonight it remembers me." Before I could question him further, he stepped inside and sat on the edge of the cot. I closed the cell door slowly, listening to the metal latch click into place. The sound echoed down the empty hallway like a small, doomed verdict. I left him there and returned to the office, but I could not ignore the tension crawling up my spine. The station felt different now. The quiet seemed too deep, like the kind that pulls breath out of your chest. I walked to the window and looked up at the sky. The moon was rising. still low on the horizon, but bright. Brighter than it had any right to be. As I watched the pale arc edge over the desert hills, a voice drifted from down the hall. Not loud, not panicked, just a whisper. I will not survive the moon. I turned, staring into the dim corridor. And then he said it again. Not as a warning this time, as a prophecy. I did not sleep. I barely sat. I walked the narrow length of the station again and again, pacing from the front desk to the far end of the hall, listening to the old building breathe around me. Sometimes the wind pushed sand against the door so fiercely it sounded like fingertips skimming the metal. Other times the silence grew so thick I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Every few minutes I found myself glancing toward the cell block. Sometimes I imagined footsteps. Sometimes I imagined whispering. And sometimes I heard something I could not explain. A slow, dragging sound from deep inside the corridor. Too soft to be movement. Too real to be imagination. Around midnight I forced myself to walk back toward the cells. The corridor felt colder than the rest of the station. Not desert night cool. Something deeper. Something that settled through my shirt and down my spine like water dripping over bare skin. The overhead bulb flickered with a soft buzz, struggling to stay lit. The man sat exactly where I had left him, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. For a moment I thought he might be asleep, but then I noticed his fingers twitching slowly over his palms, as though counting something. Cleared my throat. Sir, can we talk for a moment? He lifted his head. His eyes met mine with a clarity that unsettled me. Not wild, not confused, cold acceptance. A man waiting for the inevitable. You should not be here, Sheriff. I stepped closer to the bars, keeping the flashlight angled toward the floor. I need answers. You walked in on your own. You said you would not survive the moon. Tell me what that means. He inhaled sharply, as if the air stung his lungs. The desert has many stories. Most are just shadows cast by fear. But some are true. Some are older than this land, older than the people who claim it. I carry one of those truths. His voice lowered into something almost like prayer. I carry a curse that does not die. I rested my hand on the bars between us. Curses are stories, not realities. You are talking like something is going to happen to you. Something physical. He nodded slowly. Yes. Tell me what. Talk to me plainly. He lifted his hand and pressed it against his chest. His breathing had grown more strained, as if the air felt wrong inside him. My people warned me when I was young. The elders knew how it begins. A sickness that is not a sickness. A hunger that is not hunger. A voice that calls when the moon rises full and bright. To resist it is like resisting the tide. The change comes whether the body wills it or not. I frowned, trying to hold on to logic. You mean shapeshifting? He gave a weary smile. You try to make it a story. But it is not a story. It is something alive. Something inside me, waiting for moonrise. His voice lowered to a whisper. It has already started. As he spoke, something shifted in his posture. His spine straightened slightly, then curved forward again. His hands tightened into fists. His shoulders twitched with small, jerking movements he tried to hide. Are you in pain? He looked away. Pain is not the right word. It is more like tearing, not of flesh, of self. I took a slow breath. What exactly do you believe you become? He looked up again, and the expression in his eyes chilled my blood. Something the desert fears. Something the old stories warn about. A creature that wears the skin of a man only until the moon strips the disguise away. The air between us felt heavier then. I was suddenly aware of the silence behind me, the emptiness of the hallway, the fragility of the building. The weight of his words settled into the corners like dust waiting to move. He leaned closer to the bars. Sheriff, you must promise me something. I straightened instinctively. What? His voice dropped to a trembling plea. Do not open this door tonight. No matter how I cry or scream or beg. No matter what noises you hear. Do not open it. I felt a tightness in my throat. Why would you scream? Because I will still be here for a while. The man. But when the change takes hold, that part of me will try to call for help. It always does. And if you open this door, his voice faltered. He would finish the sentence. He did not have to. I exhaled slowly and stepped back from the bars. You are safe here. The door is solid steel. He closed his eyes. Steel does not hold back curses. A faint shiver ran through the building. Not through the air. Through the structure itself. As if a long-forgotten weight shifted in the foundation. I turned toward the hallway behind me instinctively, scanning for movement. When I looked back, the man was gripping the bars with both hands. His knuckles had gone white. His breath came quicker, harsher. It is starting. His voice trembled. Moon is rising. I checked my watch. Dawn was hours away. The desert sky outside the small barred window at the end of the hall glowed with a pale growing light. The moon had climbed high enough to spill silver into the corridor. The man stepped backward, as if the moonlight had burned him. The change follows the light. As the first thread of moonlight touched the floor of his cell, he shuddered violently. His breath hitched into a strangled gasp. His shoulders shook with a force he tried and failed to suppress. I took an involuntary step forward. Sir, what is happening? He doubled over, one hand clutching his chest, the other braced against the wall. Do not open the door. Then he pressed both palms flat to the concrete and whispered in a trembling voice that sounded nothing like the one he had used before. Please, let me die alone. And then came the first sound. A scrape. A dull, slow drag of something coarse moving across the cell floor. I stared at his feet. They were bare. Human. But the sound had not come from his feet. Something else in that cell had moved. I stepped back again, heart pounding. Another sound followed. A low rumble. A vibration that rose through the floor and into my legs like distant thunder. He lifted his head slowly, and for the first time since he arrived, I saw true terror in his expression. It is waking. Suddenly the jailhouse felt too small, too weak, too old. A place that was never meant to hold anything beyond men and their mistakes. The man collapsed onto the cot, shaking uncontrollably, his breathing turning harsh and uneven. Sheriff. I leaned forward, barely hearing my own voice. Yes. He whispered the words like a man delivering his final truth. I warned you. His body convulsed again, and the lights overhead flickered as if reacting to the shift happening inside him. And then the scratching began. Slow, deep, wrong. Something inside that cell was dragging claws across concrete. Something that was no longer entirely human. I backed out of the hall, my pulse hammering. The moon climbed higher. The scratching grew louder. The night thickened with fear. And for the first time since I became sheriff, I wished I had not come to work at all. The scratching did not stop. It shifted, growing from an intermittent scrape to a steady tearing sound, like claws dragging deep furrows into something dense. The walls of the jailhouse are old concrete, poured before my grandparents were born. No man could carve into it with bare hands, not even in a panic. But the sounds coming from that cell were not the sounds of panic. They were the sounds of something claiming space, something testing its cage. The overhead bulb flickered again. The light swelled, dimmed, then swelled again until the glass hummed with a strained buzz. I stood frozen at the threshold of the hallway, flashlight in hand, unable to force my feet closer. The scraping stopped all at once. Then came the silence. A hollow, suffocating quiet that pressed against my ears hard enough that I felt blood pumping behind my eyes. It was the kind of silence that felt crowded, as if something unseen had stepped inside it. I forced myself to speak. Sir, are you still with me? No response. Only the slow groan of the jailhouse settling, beams flexing in ways they never had before. I took one step forward, then another. My boots echoed down the hall in small, frightened beats. When I reached the door to his cell, my hand trembled as I lifted the flashlight. The beam illuminated the floor first. Dust swirled in the air, stirred by something that had moved violently. Dark streaks lined the concrete. Not quite blood, not quite dirt. Something in between, thick and uneven. I raised the light a little higher. The wall opposite the door was scarred. Deep gouges carved through the concrete like soft clay. long, deliberate marks forming patterns I could not understand. The cot had been shoved aside, bent, the metal frame twisted like wire, and the man was on the ground, kneeling, his back to me, his shoulders shaking, every breath sounding like a battle between his body and something inside him trying to break free. His fingers dug into the floor as though anchoring him. I stepped closer, careful not to let the beam rest fully on him. Some instinct warned me that the light would push whatever held the man together closer to breaking. "Sir, talk to me. If something is happening, I need to know." His voice came out in a rasp so low it barely moved the air. "Do not open the door." I pressed my forehead against the bars, lowering my voice. "What is happening to you?" A shudder ran through him. His spine arched in a way no human spine should. Bones shifted beneath skin, creating ripples of movement like waves rolling up his back. He let out a sound halfway between a groan and a snarl. I stumbled backward. His voice came again, this time strained and painful. "Leave, please." The light in the hallway flickered again, plunging the cell into momentary darkness. In that brief blackout, I heard something change in his breathing. It lengthened, deepened, almost doubled in tone. When the light returned, he had turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see one eye. It was no longer human. The iris had stretched. The pupil had narrowed. A faint glimmer of silver reflected the thin line of moonlight reaching through the barred window. I took another step back. He whispered, barely audible, "It is too late." A sudden thump shook the entire cell. Then another. The cot slid halfway across the room from the impact. I raised the flashlight again, my pulse pounding in my ears. His body jerked and twisted, limbs contorting, muscles tightening as though his skin could not contain him. His hands slammed against the floor, fingers splaying wider than they should, joints bending, bones popping with quiet snapping sounds. Then everything stopped. His breathing slowed. His back rose and fell in a way that was somehow calmer and more controlled than before. I dared to step closer. "Sir, are you still with me?" He turned his face fully toward me. For a moment, I saw the man again. His eyes softened, his mouth trembled, and his voice came quiet and clear. "Sheriff, you must leave this place." Then his expression twisted. His mouth stretched unnaturally. His jaw cracked, his eyes darkened, and something else began to emerge behind his gaze. He dropped forward onto both hands, chest heaving. The reinforced cell door rattled. Something inside him struck it from within. The entire jailhouse shuddered. I stumbled backward, gripping the wall for balance. A guttural noise rose from his throat. Not human, not animal. Something in between. Something ancient. Something desperate to escape. I shouted, though my voice shook. "Hold on. Hold on to yourself." He screamed, but the scream did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to something that had climbed through him. The cot flipped. The metal frame slammed against the wall so hard the sound echoed through the vents. The cell door trembled again as something large collided with it. Then another slam, and another, each impact stronger than the last. I ran to the office, grabbed my keys with shaking hands, then forced myself to return. Each sound grew louder, more violent. The concrete floor trembled under my boots. Then it happened. A single earth-deep roar shook the cell so violently that dust rained from the ceiling. A sound not born of a human throat. A sound that belonged to a creature that had never walked on two legs. The moonlight grew brighter, illuminating the cell through the narrow hallway window. He let out one last cry. Then everything went silent. No breathing, no movement, no scraping, only the faint rattle of settling dust. The moon hovered directly above the jailhouse. I waited hours. I do not know how many. My hands would not stop shaking. My mind would not stop repeating his final plea. "Do not open the door." But as dawn approached, something shifted inside me. Duty, curiosity, fear. I do not know which one won. The first ray of sunlight touched the desert horizon, and I reached for the keys. My hands trembled as I turned them in the lock. The door clicked open, pushed it, slowly, gently, praying he would still be there. But the moment the door opened wide enough for light to spill in, I froze. There was no body, only claw marks gouged deep into the concrete. Blood smeared across the floor in jagged arcs. The twisted cot, the smell of something wild, and the impossible truth waiting for me in the center of the cell. He was gone, completely gone, without breaking a lock, without bending a bar, without opening a door. He had torn himself out of existence, and whatever had taken his place was no longer inside that room. There are moments in a man's life that do not fade with time. They stay sharp, like broken glass buried under sand. Years soften the surface, but one wrong step brings the jagged edge back into memory. Standing in that torn-apart cell at dawn was one of those moments. Every breath I drew felt thin, as if the air itself feared what had happened there. The empty space where the man should have been felt louder than any scream I could imagine. I stared at the claw marks carved into the concrete. They were deep, far deeper than any human fingernails could reach. They cut so far into the wall that bits of stone hung like peeled bark. Blood streaked across the grooves, still drying under the first light of morning. The cot looked as if it had been crushed under something heavy. The metal warped and cracked as if twisted by machinery rather than hands. And yet the door had not been forced. The lock remained untouched. The hinges were firm. There had been no escape, no logical way out. It was as if he had simply stopped being a man and ceased to exist within the physical shape he had once carried. I stepped farther inside. The smell overcame me. Copper, dust, and something unfamiliar. A musk like wet fur left too long in the heat, mixed with the dry scent of the desert after rain. I covered my mouth and backed away until my shoulders hit the frame of the cell door. The hall behind me stretched long and silent, lit by the weak breath of sunrise creeping through the slit window. It illuminated dust floating in the air, drifting through rays of pale gold as if nothing unusual had ever happened here. A quiet building, an old jail, a place forgotten by nearly everyone. Except now I knew something else had passed through it. Something I did not understand. Something that was still out there. I walked the length of the station 3 times before stepping outside. The desert morning was cold. A strange kind of cold that clung to the skin no matter how brightly the sun shone. The sky was clear. The roads empty. Nothing moved except distant dust swirling across the highway. I checked the perimeter. No footprints. No drag marks. No blood trails. Nothing. The building rested on flat ground, surrounded by hard-packed dirt that recorded the smallest track from even a stray coyote. But there was nothing. As if whatever left that cell had not walked out. As if it had slipped past the physical world and returned to something older. I felt watched. I cannot explain it. The desert was empty, silent. The wind barely moved. Yet something pressed against the edges of my awareness, like eyes studying me from a distance just outside the reach of vision. I stepped toward the station's rear door and paused when I saw them. Tracks. Not human. Not animal. Shallow impressions in the dust, spaced far apart, as if something large had walked through with careful, silent steps. Too large to be a person. Too narrow to be a bear. Too deliberate to be any 4-legged creature from this region. And they changed as they moved away. At the beginning, closest to the building, they resembled elongated footprints. Farther out, they shifted to something else. Something clawed. Something impossibly deep for the weight the ground could support. And then, after only 50 feet, they vanished entirely. No fading. No scattering. No trail leading into the desert brush. Just gone. I crouched down, touching the first print. The shape made no sense. The toes were too long. The heel far too narrow. The depth suggested something heavier than a man. Yet the edges were perfectly clean, as if pressed down with intention rather than natural weight. The memory of his voice echoed in my mind. You must not open the door. I should have listened, should have left it sealed until others arrived. But my duty had outweighed my fear. Now I knew that duty had been misplaced. I had not opened that door to free a man or to confirm his safety. I had opened it to confirm something far worse. I stood up slowly and scanned the horizon. The desert lay flat and endless. The canyon ridges in the distance glowed with the early light, carved into ancient rock faces that had witnessed things no human records could capture. I imagined something moving between those ridges. Something that had shed its human shell during the night and now traveled with a body shaped by ancient curses. I walked farther, following the impossible prints until they ceased. The air grew warmer as the sun climbed, but the cold in my chest deepened. I could not shake the image of the man kneeling on the cell floor, begging me to leave him locked away. I returned to the station and sat at my desk. For a long time I stared at the blank incident report, my pen hovering above the paper, waiting to write words that no one would believe. A missing person report would not cover what I had witnessed. A medical episode would not explain the clawed walls. A confession of my own fear would not be tolerated by any authority. Eventually, I wrote only one sentence. Prisoner left the premises through unknown means. It was a lie, a simple lie, but better than an impossible truth. By midday, I found myself walking again outside the building. I do not know why. Perhaps I hoped the tracks would return. Perhaps I hoped they would disappear. Anything would have been better than knowing the impossible had occurred. The desert wind picked up, pushing dust across the prints. Within minutes, they softened into vague shapes. Within an hour, they completely vanished, erasing the last physical evidence of what had stood inside my cell. All that remained was the memory, and the knowledge that something had changed in the world I thought I understood. I went inside and locked the station doors. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed too long. I closed the cell block door and bolted it. The bolts rattled under my hands, as if the building itself trembled with some leftover echo of the night before. When evening fell again, I stood outside under the darkening sky, staring up at the moon as it rose once more. It was smaller now, beginning its descent toward the next cycle. But I could not look at it without remembering the man's voice. I will not survive the moon. He had been right, but the moon had not ended him. It had changed him, and somewhere out in the desert, something moved beneath the silver light. Something that had once walked into my station as a man. Something that clawed concrete walls and vanished from behind locked steel. It has been many years since the man walked into my station and warned me about the moon. I have lived long enough to understand that some memories do not fade with time. They deepen. They settle into the bones. They wait for their moment to rise again, like the tide returning to shore. That night in the cell block is one of those memories. It has shaped every day of my life since. The official report still sits in the county archive. A thin folder with a single sheet of paper and a typed line stating that the prisoner left through unknown means. No one ever questioned it. No one ever came looking for him. No family. No friends. No fingerprints in any database. It was as if he had never existed in the first place. But I know better. After that morning, I tried to convince myself I had witnessed a breakdown, a hallucination born from the long quiet hours of desert isolation. I tried to believe the claw marks were vandalism left by someone else. I told myself that maybe he had panicked, maybe he had found a way out that I had overlooked. But I could not deny the tracks. They appeared again. 2 months after the incident, on a night with a near full moon, I found new prints behind the station. Deeper this time, spaced farther apart, as if whatever made them had grown stronger. They led toward the canyon ridge before fading into scrub brush and sand. I followed them as far as I dared. Every so often I heard something moving just beyond the edge of my vision. A low breath, a faint rustle, footsteps that stopped when I stopped. When I turned back, something watched from the ridge. A silhouette, tall, unnatural, standing perfectly still against the moon. From that night forward, I never again doubted what the man had become. I stopped patrolling after sunset. I stopped responding to calls near the canyon trails. When hikers went missing, I let the tribal authorities take the case. They never said much, just exchanged quiet glances that carried more truth than any report could capture. Old truths, ancient truths, truths that had been whispered for generations before my badge ever existed. Some nights, the lights in the station flicker even though the wiring was replaced years ago. Some nights I hear something pacing behind the cell block door even though the room is empty. I stopped using that cell. I keep it locked at all times. The deputies who worked with me then have all left. Some moved away. Some changed careers. One simply vanished after claiming he heard a voice whispering his name through the bars. I never filed that report either. The town itself has grown quieter with each passing year. More houses sit empty. More businesses close. The desert keeps reclaiming what was once ours. And sometimes I wonder if that thing out there, whatever it became, feels the same pull. A return to something older than civilization, older than the myths that tried to warn us. The nights of the full moon are the hardest. I sit at my desk, long past retirement age now, staring at the shadows shifting under the desert sky. Sometimes I catch movement near the razor wire fence behind the station. A stillness too deliberate to be an animal. A shape too tall to be a man. I do not go outside anymore when I see it. I used to call for backup. Used to reach for my gun. Now I only turn off the lights and wait for the moon to pass overhead. Because I know it is not hunting me. It is watching me. It remembers that I was the last man to speak to it when it still had a voice. The last man to see its eyes before they changed. The last man to witness the moment the curse claimed what was left of the human inside it. And I carry that memory like a shadow. Tonight, as I record this confession, the moon is nearly full again. I can feel it crawling across the sky even without looking. The desert outside is restless. The air is too still. The walls of this station feel thinner than ever. I know it is close. I heard it not an hour ago. A low scrape along the outside of the building. A sound that echoed through the vents. A sound I have tried for years to convince myself I imagined. There are nights when I see glowing eyes reflected in the glass of my office door. Not bright, not animal, just present, quiet, patient, remembering. Comes back to this place because some part of it was born here. In that cell. Under that moon. In the moment I unlocked the door and saw that the prophecy had already been fulfilled. The man turned himself in, said he would not survive the moon. And I did not believe him. But the moon rose, and the walls were clawed from the inside, and the man was gone. Now, every full moon, I feel the desert breathe outside my windows, and I know the truth he tried to give me that night. Some curses do not die. They only wait for their moon to return. And the creature that walks under that moon still remembers the man who freed it. Still remembers me.